Near Smolensk, Eastern Front, December 1941. At minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, the German soldiers knew they would freeze. What they didn't know was that something ancient had already marked them for death. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale of cold that kills, and the horrors that hunger for frozen flesh. The Wehrmacht's advance into Russia had ground to a frozen halt by December 1941. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's ambitious push eastward, was failing not from Soviet resistance, but from General Winter's merciless assault. Official military records show that German casualties from cold-related injuries had surpassed combat losses by early December. But somewhere in the vast Smolensk forests, Corporal Elias Bauer and his 5-man reconnaissance unit would soon discover that frostbite was the least of their concerns. Bauer was a seasoned Bavarian soldier, decorated during the French campaign and respected by his men. The mission seemed straightforward: track Soviet forces reportedly retreating deeper into the woods. Intelligence suggested a Red Army battalion had abandoned their positions, leaving behind crucial equipment and intelligence. High Command wanted answers. His team consisted of veterans: the stoic Sergeant Klaus Reinhardt, practical Corporal Werner Brandt, and 3 privates: Hans Dietz, the unit's marksman; Josef Kohl, their radio operator; and Felix Gruber, their medic. All were hardened soldiers who had fought from Poland to the gates of Moscow. None were prepared for what awaited them in those ancient forests. Military meteorological records from the 12th of December, 1941, documented the lowest temperatures recorded during the entire Russian campaign. The thermometer read minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit as Bauer led his men into the darkness between the towering pines. Their breath crystallized instantly, forming ice crystals on their uniforms. The tanks and trucks had long since frozen solid, leaving them to trek on foot through snow that reached their knees. "The cold isn't natural," Private Gruber muttered, checking his medical kit for the 3rd time that hour. "It's like the forest itself is trying to freeze us solid." Bauer understood his concern. The Wehrmacht had faced brutal conditions before, but this was different. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of boots on snow and the occasional crack of frozen branches. No birds called, no animals moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting. A classified addendum to the official mission briefing, discovered decades later in Berlin's military archives, contained a cryptic warning: exercise extreme caution in forests north of Smolensk. Local populations report unusual activity. Multiple units lost contact after reporting strange phenomena. Avoid night operations if possible. That warning, like so many others, never reached Corporal Bauer. As darkness fell on their first day in the forest, the temperature plummeted further. The men huddled around a small fire, their weapons close at hand, unaware that they were already being watched by something that had awakened from its ancient slumber, drawn by the scent of their desperation and hunger. The war had brought men into these pristine forests, men with guns and tanks and planes, but the forest remembered older wars, older hungers. And as Corporal Bauer took the first watch, staring into the impenetrable darkness between the trees, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something far older and more terrible than their war. Soviet records recovered after the war detailed an entire platoon that vanished in these same forests just weeks earlier. Their last transmission mentioned strange tracks in the snow, tracks that began as human boot prints before elongating, deepening, transforming into something else. Those same documents included testimonies from local villagers who spoke of an ancient evil that had haunted these woods for centuries, awakening only in the coldest winters when hunger and desperation peaked. Corporal Bauer discovered the first signs at dawn. The night watch had been uneventful, save for strange, distant cries that Reinhardt insisted were just wolves. But the tracks that circled their camp told a different story. They were massive, deeper than any human prints, with distinct claw marks at the edges. More disturbing were the smaller tracks they found, standard Red Army boot prints that suddenly veered off into the woods, accompanied by drag marks and dark stains in the snow. "Herr Corporal!" Private Kohl's voice cracked with urgency. He stood before an abandoned Soviet encampment, half buried in snow. The scene was unsettling, no signs of combat, yet equipment lay scattered as if the soldiers had fled in panic. Ragged tents still stood, containing frost-covered supplies and personal effects. In one, they found a diary. Bauer watched as Cole, their Russian translator, pored over the weather-worn pages. The private's face grew increasingly pale as he read. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, hands trembling slightly as he translated. "It comes in the deepest cold, when hunger gnaws at the belly and frost burns the flesh. We hear it calling, calling. Some say it's the spirit of General Winter himself, but the old woman in the village told us the truth. It's older than winter, older than the forest. It hungers not just for flesh, but for the desperation of dying men." The diary's final entry was a frantically scrawled warning. "Don't let anyone wander alone. Don't listen when it calls with familiar voices. And whatever you do, don't eat." The rest was illegible, stained dark brown. As Cole read, the temperature seemed to drop further. Frost crept across their equipment, and their breath hung in the air like frozen ghosts. Bauer ordered the diary burned. Such superstitious nonsense would only damage morale. But as the pages crackled in the flames, a howl echoed through the forest, closer than any previous night. It carried notes that seemed almost human, almost like words. The men instinctively drew closer to the fire, all except Private Dietz, who stood rigid, staring into the woods with an unsettling intensity. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. It sounded like my mother's voice. Sergeant Reinhardt grabbed Dietz's shoulder, shaking him roughly. "Your mother's in Munich, boy. This damned cold is getting to your head." But Bauer noticed how Reinhardt's hand trembled, how his eyes darted between the trees. The sergeant had led men through the worst of the French campaign, yet something about these woods had him rattled. A Wehrmacht psychological assessment from 1942 noted a peculiar pattern. Soldiers who reported hearing voices calling from the Russian forests often disappeared within days. The report was filed under combat stress incidents and forgotten, one more mystery in a war full of unexplained horrors. December 1941 brought an inexplicable silence to Wehrmacht communications near Smolensk. Dozens of units simply vanished, their final transmissions cut mid-sentence. High command blamed the cold. They were wrong. Horror announced itself at 0500 hours. Standard two-man reconnaissance patrol. Private Dietz and Corporal Brandt. Only Brandt returned, his scream splitting the pre-dawn darkness. Bauer found him wild-eyed, MP-40 empty, spent cartridges glinting in bloodied snow. "It took Dietz," Brandt stammered. "Christ in heaven, it was so fast." The tracks told an impossible story, 2 sets of boot prints leading out. Then a third appeared, massive, deeper than human, with claw marks at the edges. Dietz's prints became frantic before ending in a spray of blood and drag marks vanishing between the trees. They found him at dawn. Wehrmacht regulations forbade recovering casualties during combat operations. But this was different. This was hunting. Dietz hung 15 feet up a massive pine, body twisted into an obscene sculpture, joints bent backward, limbs elongated, as if something had tried to reshape human anatomy. His face bore an expression of horrible recognition. He'd seen something his mind couldn't accept. "The cold should have preserved him," Gruber muttered, examining the corpse. "But these marks, no animal feeds like this." Soviet intelligence had documented similar cases. Soldiers found in trees, contorted, partially devoured. They'd blamed partisans until their own men started disappearing the same way. The wind shifted as they cut him down. A sweet, rotting stench, decay and ancient ice washed over them. Through the swirling snow, Bauer saw it. Impossibly tall, wrong-jointed limbs, moving with terrible purpose. It turned, meeting his gaze with eyes that held centuries of cunning hunger. Reinhardt's hands shook as he crossed himself. "Mein Gott," he whispered. "The diary was right. It's not just hunting. It's playing." The radio crackled. Through static came Dietz's voice, calling for help. But Dietz lay at their feet, throat torn, vocal cords frozen. The voice called again, closer now. Something large moved through the underbrush. "No one answers," Bauer ordered, voice hoarse. Whatever's out there, it's learning. Wehrmacht medical records from the Eastern Front document a peculiar phenomenon they termed winter madness. Soldiers would become increasingly paranoid, reporting intense hunger that no rations could satisfy. In the final stages, victims often exhibited unusual physical changes, elongated teeth, darkened eyes, and an unnatural tolerance for extreme cold. The day after Dietz's death, supplies became a critical concern. Standard Wehrmacht field rations had frozen solid, and game had mysteriously vanished from the forest. Bauer noticed his men watching each other during meals, counting every crumb, measuring every portion with suspicious eyes. Private Cole discovered the cache of Soviet supplies that evening, preserved meat in unmarked tins. The men fell upon it like wolves, their military discipline cracking under the weight of hunger. Only Bauer abstained, remembering the diary's unfinished warning, "Don't eat." "Something's wrong with Brandt," Reinhardt reported during his watch, voice barely above a whisper. Found him gnawing on frozen horse meat from his pack, meat he swears he never carried. His teeth, they looked different. Bauer had noticed the changes himself. Brandt's originally practical nature had given way to an almost feral intensity. His eyes had grown darker, more sunken. During cold nights, while others huddled for warmth, Brandt stood apart, staring into the darkness with an unsettling smile. A recovered field surgery report from a nearby Wehrmacht medical unit described similar symptoms. Patient exhibits extreme physical changes, dental structure altering rapidly, body temperature dropping well below survivable levels. Most disturbing is the patient's complete lack of concern regarding these transformations. The breaking point came at midnight. Cole discovered Brandt hunched over their remaining rations, shoving frozen meat into his mouth with bloody hands. The ensuing confrontation nearly shattered the unit. Brandt fought with inhuman strength, his joints moving at impossible angles. It took 3 men to subdue him. "You don't understand." Brandt laughed, his voice distorted by elongated teeth. "It's not about hunger. It's about becoming. The forest. It shows you how to survive, how to change." Bauer ordered Brandt restrained, but the ropes froze and snapped in the supernatural cold. As they struggled to bind him with wire, an eerie chorus of howls echoed through the trees. The sounds carried human notes, snippets of German, Russian, and something older, a language that made their ears bleed. Brandt's head snapped up at the calls, his neck bending unnaturally. "They're coming," he whispered, grinning with 2 sharp teeth. "My new brothers are coming. You should have eaten when you had the chance, Herr Corporal. Should have let the hunger in." A classified psychological evaluation from 1943 theorized that extreme cold and isolation could trigger rapid psychological deterioration, but the report's appendix, marked for high command only, suggested something far worse. Evidence indicates external influence. Something is actively transforming our men. Recommend immediate evacuation of all units from Smolensk forest region. The warning came too late for Bauer's unit, as another howl split the night. Closer now, Brandt's restraints lay empty. Only bloody snow and inhuman tracks remained, leading into the darkness that had already claimed Dietz. A single document in the Wehrmacht's Occult Research Division, dated January 1942, contains a hastily scrawled note. "The Wendigo whack is not a myth. Local shamans warn of ancient spirits that possess the desperate and hungry, transforming them into monsters." Multiple confirmations from both German and Soviet sources. These entities are drawn to battlefields. They feed on desperation as much as flesh. The night after Brandt's transformation, the temperature plunged to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The remaining men, Bauer, Reinhardt, Cole, and Gruber, fortified their position in a shallow cave. Standard military doctrine emphasized defensive positions with clear fields of fire. But their weapons seemed useless now. The creatures hunting them ignored bullets like snowflakes. Through the radio came a symphony of familiar voices, Dietz calling for medical aid, Brandt reporting enemy positions, even messages in Bauer's own voice. The creatures had learned to mimic them perfectly. Worse, they had learned to use military protocols against them. Patrol Baker. 3. Reporting heavy enemy contact. Brandt's voice crackled through Cole's radio. requesting immediate support at coordinates. The coordinates matched their location exactly. They're coordinating, Reinhardt realized, horror dawning in his eyes, using our own tactics against us, like they've absorbed not just our voices but our military training. The attack came from multiple directions, utilizing standard Wehrmacht infiltration techniques. Dark shapes moved through the snow with tactical precision. Bauer glimpsed their true forms in the muzzle flashes, emaciated giants with elongated limbs and antler-like protrusions, their skin stretched tight over impossibly large frames. Their eyes held centuries of cunning and hunger. Cole's transformation began during the firefight. His screams of pain turned to howls of ecstasy as his body contorted, joints cracking as they reversed direction. The cold, he gasped, his voice distorting. It's not just weather, it's them. They bring the cold. They are the cold. A Soviet intelligence report, discovered decades later, contained a similar observation. The entities appear to lower temperatures in their vicinity. They don't simply hunt in the cold, they weaponize it. Temperature drops of 40 degrees have been recorded in their presence. Reinhardt emptied his MP-40 into the nearest creature. The bullets tore through its flesh, revealing not blood, but layers of crystallized ice and preserved meat from previous victims. The thing smiled with Brandt's stolen face before impaling the sergeant on foot-long claws. As Reinhardt fell, Bauer saw the truth in his dying eyes. These weren't simply monsters, they were the forest's immune system, targeting and transforming human invaders into something that could survive its ancient cold. The war had awakened them, but they had been waiting for centuries, turning trespassers into apex predators uniquely adapted to their domain. Military records show that over 200,000 German soldiers were listed as missing in action on the Eastern Front. How many, Bauer wondered, had actually been claimed by these entities? How many had been transformed into eternal hunters in these cursed woods? A final transmission from a nearby Wehrmacht unit logged moments before they went silent forever. They're not killing us, they're recruiting us. Wehrmacht survival protocols for the Eastern Front emphasized one critical rule: movement equals survival. Yet military records show that units attempting to flee the Smolensk forests had a lower survival rate than those who fortified their positions. Something in these woods knew how to hunt fleeing prey. Only Bauer and Gruber remained human. They abandoned their cave position at dawn, leaving behind burning equipment as per Wehrmacht scorched earth protocols. The creatures had shattered their radio, but distant gunfire suggested other German units nearby. Standard military doctrine called for regrouping with friendly forces. The forest played with them as they fled. Paths that should have led east somehow brought them back to the same blood-stained clearings. Compass needles spun uselessly, and the sun seemed to shift position in the sky. The cold had become a living thing, probing for weaknesses in their clothing and resolve. A classified Wehrmacht report described identical experiences. Units report spatial anomalies within affected forests. Geographic features appear to shift. Compass equipment malfunctions. Men report walking for hours only to return to their starting points. The creatures herded them with tactical precision, using coordinated movements that mirrored Wehrmacht small unit tactics. Bauer recognized standard flanking maneuvers, but with horrific efficiency. The things moving through the trees had absorbed decades of military knowledge from their victims. Gruber's medical training proved useless against the supernatural cold. Frostbite spread with impossible speed, blackening flesh within minutes. "This isn't natural cold," he muttered, examining his darkening fingers. "It's like it's alive, trying to get inside us." They found the other German unit, or what remained of it. A platoon of mountain troops lay scattered through a clearing, their bodies contorted and half-transformed. Some had begun to elongate before death, their uniforms splitting as their bones reformed. Others showed signs of desperate cannibalism. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Gruber whispered, examining the remains. "The transformation isn't just physical. Look at their equipment, arranged in perfect tactical positions." They were still trying to follow military protocols even as they changed. A Soviet study of similar sites, marked "Most Secret," noted, German casualties show evidence of organized resistance even during metamorphosis. Military training appears to persist through transformation, creating apex predators with tactical knowledge. The attack came as they studied the scene. Something wearing Reinhardt's face emerged from the trees, moving with liquid grace, despite its impossible height. "Join us, Herr Corporal," it called in their sergeant's voice. "The cold stops hurting once you let it in, once you embrace the change." More shapes appeared, things that had once been Dietz, Brandt, and Kohl, their bodies twisted into predatory perfection. They moved with coordinated precision, cutting off escape routes with textbook military efficiency. These weren't mindless monsters. They were tactically sophisticated hunters, using decades of accumulated combat experience. Gruber's transformation began as they ran. His teeth lengthened first, then his joints began to crack in reverse. "Run!" he screamed at Bauer, his voice already distorting. "I can feel their thoughts now, their memories, so many memories, so many wars." The medical officer's last human act was to draw his Luger and fire a single shot into his own head. But even as his body fell, Bauer saw the crystalline ice beginning to spread across Gruber's skin. Even death might not stop the transformation in these cursed woods. Official Wehrmacht records list Corporal Elias Bauer as missing in action after December 1941, but a classified addendum found in Soviet archives after the war tells a different story. A Red Army patrol found him 2 weeks later, half frozen but alive, in a village 50 kilometers from his last known position. His debriefing document remains heavily redacted, but certain sections survive. Subject exhibits severe psychological trauma, but no signs of physical transformation. Claims entire unit lost to tactical winter entities demonstrating advanced military capability. Of particular concern, subject reports creatures are actively building an army using military expertise absorbed from German and Soviet casualties. Bauer's survival came at a terrible cost. He reached the village by following Wehrmacht tactical doctrine to the letter, moving only during daylight, avoiding trails, and using terrain to his advantage. But the things hunting him had access to the same training. Each step became a psychological battle against hunters that knew his every move before he made it. The final confrontation came in a snow-filled clearing. They surrounded him, creatures that had once been his unit, now twisted into something ancient and terrible. Their bodies were architectural masterpieces of survival, elongated limbs for moving through deep snow, razor-sharp claws for hunting, and joints that could bend in any direction. But their eyes held the tactical intelligence of experienced soldiers. "The cold preserves everything," the thing wearing Reinhardt's face told him. "Every soldier we take adds to our knowledge. Soon, we'll have enough tactical expertise to move beyond these forests, to hunt in every theater of war." A Soviet psychological warfare study from 1943 suggested a chilling possibility. These entities may represent a new form of tactical evolution, predators that specifically target and adapt military knowledge. Each soldier transformed adds to their collective combat expertise. Bauer survived because they wanted him to. "Go," the creature that had been Brandt ordered. "Tell your commanders what awaits them. Tell them about the Winter's Legion. We want them to know fear before we come for them." His debriefing resulted in a classified Wehrmacht directive. Smolensk Forest Region designated restricted zone. No units to enter without explicit authorization. Local folklore regarding Wendigo entities to be taken as credible tactical intelligence. But the war demanded bodies, and the Eastern Front continued to devour men. By 1944, over 300,000 Axis soldiers had vanished in the Russian winter. How many fell to Soviet bullets, and how many were claimed by the Winter's Legion? The forest keeps its secrets. Today, satellite imagery shows the Smolensk forests have grown larger, spreading year by year. NATO thermal imaging reveals impossible cold spots that move with tactical precision. And in the deepest winter, long-range microphones pick up sounds that military AI identifies as radio transmissions in German, Russian, and dozens of other languages. all using perfect military protocols from every war of the last century. The Winter's Legion is still hunting, still learning, still growing. They're waiting for the next war, the next invasion, the next chance to add to their tactical knowledge. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howls like artillery fire, hunters say you can hear them drilling, an army of ancient horrors practicing modern warfare, preparing for the day they finally march out of their frozen fortress. Bauer's final warning scrawled in the margins of his debriefing. They're not just monsters anymore. They're soldiers, and they're building something out there in the cold. God help us all when they decide to launch their own offensive. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive sent an unnatural chill down your spine, join our ranks of military horror historians. When subscribing, notice if your screen feels unusually cold to the touch. The Winter's Legion has been known to manifest in peculiar ways. Hit that notification bell to receive future classified files from humanity's darkest battlefields. Leave a comment below. Have you served in areas where the cold felt alive? Or perhaps you've heard stories of patrol units that vanished in winter, leaving only strange tracks in the snow. Remember, the Winter's Legion is still recruiting, and their tactical knowledge grows with every conflict. Stay vigilant and never ignore when the cold feels wrong.